Define what financial success is before you really get into the game.
That's Dave Meyer, Vice President of Data and Analytics at BiggerPockets. And he believes that the perfect real estate strategy for you is, well, personal, which means you shouldn't worry about what other people are doing.
There are many, many valid ways to succeed in real estate investing, and you should just focus on the ones that are right for you.
In this episode, you'll learn the important first step that most people skip over in real estate investing.
Just think about, what do I actually want to get out of real estate investing?
How to design the ideal investment property for you.
Once you know your goal, then you can start to design deals that work for you. Your financing strategy, what property class you're going to buy.
How to optimize your portfolio once you already own some rental properties.
If you sold your property, would you do better on cash return or worse?
And the key metrics to pay attention to at the end of your financial journey.
Evaluating across your portfolio.
And now we're going to dig into all of that and more. What's the problem you see a lot of smaller or just individual, whatever real estate investors that get them to the point where they need to focus on strategy? Because the name of the book, Start with Strategy. Is it overwhelm? Is it the fact that people are have 1,000 different ideas and they can't even figure out where they should do? Talk to me a little bit about what the common challenges are people are facing.
There is just an abundance of options in real estate to buy, and it's complicated to figure out if you're new which way you should go. There's short-term rentals, then the new flavor of the month comes out. It's medium-term rentals, or it's sub 2, which I have nothing against those things. But if you're new, right? There's so many different things to buy, and it's not or to consider. And it's not you're opening a trading app and you can buy 5 different stocks and, dabble here or there. Real estate is entrepreneurship. And so you have to build a business and you have to get good at, a couple of things. And so I think people generally feel this, there's a book I love called The Paradox of Choice, where people think they want choice, but when you are faced with so many different options, it can become very overwhelming and sort of leads to actually more indecision. And so I think that is a common thing, at least I see in real estate investing, whether it's trying to pick which market to go into, what asset class to buy, what business plan to follow. If you're new to it, it can be really sort of difficult to figure out.
What I see this book as is like a framework that you can plug all of those into, that you can use as an individual investor. So I really think that's amazing. And you call it a portfolio strategy or a portfolio plan. And so I'd like to dig into maybe the components of that strategy. So you start with this idea of having a vision personally. This is that real estate's not the same for everybody else. This is a very personal decision. It's personal finance. And one of the things that I thought was really helpful is you do something called recommend a resource audit, where you actually look at what you personally, almost like a balance sheet for yourself. What are my strengths, my weaknesses? What do I have to offer? What do I not have to offer? Could you talk a little bit more about how we assess ourselves before we jump into picking a strategy?
I'm sure you get this question all the time, Chad, where people are like, should I flip houses or should I do short-term rentals? Should I do medium-term rentals? And the answer, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. And so the book starts with asking people to craft their own vision and really take some time. It's not as exciting as purchasing a property, but I think it's more valuable to spend a lot of time and just think about why am I doing this? What do I actually want to get out of real estate investing? And then you can start to build backwards from there for what strategies and which tactics actually work for you. Because if you think about, some people are oh, I want to, quit my job, but then they immediately say that they want to flip houses. And you're well, that's just another job. That's just trading a W-2 job for a 1099 job, so it's not exactly what you want to do. And so what I recommend what people do is try and identify what they care about and then what they're willing to put into it. And so when people think about what are you going to invest into your portfolio, the obvious thing is money, right? Capital. You should have a good idea of what you can invest. But I also think there are more resources that you can use to invest in real estate. One being time. I think time is a really important thing for people to think about when they craft their portfolio. Because, for me, for example, I work full time. So I have a general rule of thumb that I follow, that I try and not spend more than 10 to 20 hours a month on my portfolio. And that is a really helpful framework for me in making decisions. So like when I'm like, okay, I could go buy a stabilized rental property that maybe gets me 6 or 7% cash on cash return, but I can just buy it and do it. Or I can earn a 12% return, but I'm going to have to manage a large rehab. Then because I've done this audit and thought about how much time I want to put in, I know that I can't do the rehab. Like it's attractive. Maybe sometime in the future I would do that, but it sort of serves as this filtering mechanism out of all of those strategies because I know how much capital I have, because I know how much time I'm going to commit. And the third resource is skill, like what things I like doing in terms of building a portfolio and I'm competent at. That also allows me to do it. Like I am not handy, so I shouldn't be doing, people always ask me like, oh, should I just self-manage? I'm like, are you going to be good at that? You have to start thinking about who you are, what you want, and then you can, I promise, no matter what answers you have to that, there are real estate strategies that will work for you, but you need to start with like who you are and what you're trying to accomplish.
This is such an important concept you're putting forward here, because when people get into the business, if they do this assessment first and they think about it a little bit and they look at, you have a whole list of different strategies and how to make the choice on which way to go. But this is such an important first step that people probably skip over a lot of the time.
The thing about this resource audit, I think one of the other frameworks in the book is this concept of like a resource, I call it the resource triangle, but it's basically what Chad was just saying, which is if you don't need all three resources. You don't need capital, you don't need time, you don't need skill. If you have all three, that's great. That will probably help you. But as long as you have one, you can trade or acquire the other one, right? So if you have money, it's pretty easy. You can buy someone else's time, you can buy someone else's skill. You hire a contractor, you hire a property manager. But I think for people who are getting started, they might not know like what you did, Chad, which is you were wealthiest in your time resource, and you were able to trade that for people who had capital and who didn't have time. That's very similar to how I got started. And maybe you were also able to use their money to acquire some people's skill. And so I think that's a really helpful thing for people when they're getting started. It's just like looking at realistically like what you can contribute. And there are tons of people, Chad, myself, and tons of other real estate investors who get started with very little money. But that's because we were able to identify the thing we could offer, which was time for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to say about vision? Because this is a big topic and I want people to dig into the book, but in a short interview, I know there's a lot but is there anything we left out on vision that you would say is like a must know that you in the book?
I think the only other thing about vision is about setting specific financial goals. I think so much of the book we talk about risk and reward, and I think knowing how much you need and how much you want really helps dictate strategy. Because if you're starting with little and you're only going to be happy with $100 million, you're going to have to take a lot of risk. But if you are, starting, you have a high-paying job, and you just want to have a modest improvement in your financial situation, that's going to open up a lot of more options to you because you can take lower risk, lower return types of things. And I know it's tempting for a lot of people to just say like, my goal is to make as much money as possible, but I just don't think that's realistic. And I just don't think it's helpful, because then you don't get to ever step back and sort of enjoy the fruits of your labor and say like, I've made it, I've built this portfolio because I wanted financial success. Like, define what financial success is before you really get into the game. If you want to be a mogul, go for it. But you're going to have very different decisions than someone who plans to keep working for 20 years, and is just trying to like build a retirement portfolio. And so I think if you really, and it can always change, but if you just like do the exercise and think about like, here's the amount of money I want, here's what my portfolio I want it to be valued at, and that's when I'll be happy. That will really set you up for easier decision making over the course of your investing career.
All right, so you have a vision, you do some assessment, you think about these things. You now get to get into the real estate part of the model and saying like, how will real estate actually help me accomplish my goals? And this is another step that I see a lot of people getting stuck on. They're like, oh man, you tell me that I need to build a buy box, Chad, but like, is this the right property for me? Is that the right property? So could you help us out a little bit? How do you help narrow down like this real estate deal? You call it a deal design stage of the planning process.
I call it deal design because I think a lot of people talk about quote unquote finding deals. And I get that like there is a very important part of real estate, which is going out and identifying the specific properties that you want to buy. But I think that real estate, the thing I love about it is like you can craft your own deal. Like you can sort of make it what you want it to be. So like you could buy a property and you can turn it into a single family. You can use different types of financing. You can use different management structures to accomplish your specific goal. And again, that's why the vision comes first, because once you know your goal, then you can start to design deals that work for you. And so the way I think about that, I've sort of broken down the variables that go into a deal into 8 different deal design elements is what I call them in the book. These are things like your financing strategy, what property class you're going to buy, what asset class you're going to buy, what I call the deal type, which is like flipping or short-term rentals or commercial. And so what I recommend to people is once you've created your vision and you know what you want to accomplish out of real estate, start to work backwards and identify which deal elements work for you. So just going off the example of you and I, like if you're looking at deal types that are going to, work for you, for Chad and I, flipping probably not going to work. Like that's probably not something. If you could do that in 2 hours a week, I'd be very impressed. So
haven't figured that one out yet.
No, exactly. So I've never flipped a house in my life, and I never intend to. Because it just doesn't work with my vision. And so that works for me. That also goes for partnership structure or for ownership structures, which is another one of the deal elements. I moved to Europe. I live in Europe right now. And so my deal design now doesn't involve as much direct ownership. I do a lot more syndications or I do partnerships with people because I just can't be as close. I can't do property management. And so I really think like looking at sort of taking your vision and then looking at all the possible options and filtering them down just to the ones that make sense for you is like an extremely helpful exercise in focus, because it really helps you just say like, okay, there are 100 different permutations of deals that I can do, but these 10 are the ones that I'm really going to think about to grow my investing career. And there's still tons of ways to get creative and have fun with those types of 10 options, but it just sort of gets rid of this shiny object syndrome where you're just like chasing all these different potential ideas.
Yeah, I think the magic of this step is that word focus. Every time I focused in my business, in my real estate investing, it's been not just a 2x improvement, it's been like a 10x improvement. And I think it's because it's that this idea that if your brain works with focus, that it's used to like ignoring a whole lot of stimuli. And if you give it one thing, your reticular activating system, you give it this one little program that says, this is what you should focus on, brain. That seems to be what you're doing in this step. You're saying, this is a deal that I'm focusing on. And then magically they start appearing and you have to do some work to find them, right? But all of a sudden you're finding this ideal deal because you've decided to focus on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so overwhelming. And I get it too. I mean, Chad, you probably talk to all these interesting people, as I fortunately get to do on my podcast, and I hear about these strategies and I get FOMO, I'm like, oh my God, that's a cool idea. Like, I wish I could do that. But you sort of have to ground yourself and then be like, no, that's not for me. Like, that's great that XYZ, some person is, found this really interesting way to grow their business. But for me, like, I know what I want. And so I'm going to focus on these 3 things because they have worked for me in the past and they're probably going to keep working for me in the future. And then you get really good at it instead of, trying to do 10 different things. I'm just going to try and get good at a couple things that I know I can focus on.
So I want to go to the third part of your portfolio plan strategy. We got a vision, you got a goal, you kind of assess where you are. We start formulating a plan around what kind of real estate is going to help us out, what we're going to focus on. Then we get to this part, which is actually my favorite part of the book because it's probably more where I am at this stage of my career, which is actually the management of your portfolio. So this can include just executing, buying properties. This could include like if you're already further along, like measuring your portfolio and deciding, should I sell, should I keep, should I refinance, like kind of that tactical stuff. So maybe could you unpack what this stage of the planning process is and how this can help us out?
Absolutely. So in the framework in the book, the vision's the broadest thing. Like that's what you want. It's, people call it your why. It's like what you're trying to achieve. The deal design focuses down a little bit more and tells you like where you should be paying attention, what kind of deals could you do in the future. And then this last step, property management, is really just the most granular. It's like what decisions should I be making in the next 12 months, for example, on my portfolio. And that includes buying property, which is what everyone wants to do. But I think there are a lot of other elements of portfolio management that are equally, if not more important, that people should be looking at. Things like, benchmarking and understanding, like, are your deals as good as what you could do if you sold them? Like if you sold your property, would you do better on cash return or worse? Like that's an exercise you should be doing regularly when you're managing your portfolio. Or evaluating risk across your portfolio. Like, do you have all of your money tied up in one deal that's kind of risky? Or do you have it spread out between a couple of different strategies or a couple different markets? These kinds of questions, I think, are really helpful in building confidence about what to do next. You talk a lot in these days about, people are afraid to get into the market. But I think if you do these types of this research into your portfolio and what's going on in the broader economy, it helps you really make decisions. And ultimately, this property management thing winds up in writing out like your intentions for the next year. And so I call this the action plan. But you start by doing this research into your own deals, macroeconomics, what's going on, all these things. And I teach people how to do that. And then you say, like, here's my investment thesis for the next year. And it just gives you some, like, I think of it as like guardrails or bumpers in the bowling lane of like how you're going to act in the next year or so. And so for me, that might say, I'm going to focus on residential real estate because I think that, interest rates are going to drop in the next 3 months, and that's going to increase demand. And so that allows me to look at my deal designs and pick the specific deals, build my buy box, and go actually execute on a couple of things in the near term that I know, because I've done the other parts of the framework, are well aligned with sort of my long-term vision.
I love this idea of an investment thesis. I've done this a couple of times, but I've gotten away from it. I want to get back to it, and this has inspired me to do that, because when you write down what your thesis is, you're like, this is why in 2024 I'm going to invest in this type of property, and you actually put it doesn't have to be long, just like a little bullet list. Then at the end, every quarter, you can go back and look at it. At the end of the year, you can go back and look at it, and you might adjust it. You probably will adjust it, as often happens, but you actually know why you did what you did, because often I'll do 6 months of action, and I'm like, why did I do this? Like, what was I thinking? Like,
right,
you kind of forget. Like, the entrepreneurial muscle is just go, do it. It might have been as stupid, or not as stupid, as silly as you heard a podcast and somebody was doing midterm rentals, and you're like, that sounds like a great idea. And then all of a sudden today, you're going and making offers on midterm rentals. And what I'm hearing you say is like, actually just put a little bit of a plan, put it to paper, and you have some templates in the book where people can actually like fill in the blanks, basically. Like, put a plan together. Here's your thesis, here's your action plan, and then follow the plan that you wrote down in the beginning of the year.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think for buying, it's super helpful because you need to be disciplined about buying. But I also think that the action plan, the investment thesis, also includes learning opportunities. It's not just about buying real estate. I think one is resource allocation. I always think about how to rebalance my time. It sounds like we're similar in terms of that. And so like, I like to look at my deals and I say like, that one's really kind of a pain in the butt. And so I'm just going to sell that one and put it into something that's a little bit easier for me. And like the process of writing that down, I just think is super helpful because, there's so many things demand your attention these days that it's hard, if you don't go through the process of writing it down, you can get distracted, you can forget about it. Real estate is entrepreneurship. It's a business. And so at the end of the day, like this framework of vision and deal design and portfolio management, it's really trying to just be a business plan specifically for real estate investors. And this last part is like, what's your plan, for the next, quarter or a year? Like at BiggerPockets, I work at BiggerPockets full time. We do that. Businesses do this. Like you write down, like, what is your plan for the next year? What is your strategy? What are you going to do in the first quarter? What are you going to do in the second quarter? And so if you're a serious investor, even if it's small, you have to take it seriously as a business. And, I do it 10 hours a month, but I still write down what I'm going to do and treat it like a business and give it sort of the respect and planning that it deserves.
I think we give a lot of attention to new investors, rightfully so. There's a lot of people who get into the business and they're trying to buy that first property or two. I think, I found lately that people who are further along, in my book, I call them, you have your starters, your wealth builders, and then you have these harvesters, people who are like harvesting their wealth, and there's different strategies for different stages. I'm curious. I mean, I think you're a little bit further along as I am in my journey. Using this portfolio management framework, what are the kinds of benchmarks or performance metrics? You mentioned time as maybe one. Like, what are some other metrics that maybe people are surprised by or haven't thought about because we haven't given enough attention that somebody could pay attention to in this portfolio management stage if they're further along in their journey?
It's kind of shocking to me, but I think risk is probably the most under-discussed thing in real estate. Like, people talk about the upside, but there is absolutely risk in real estate investing. I don't think it's like huge, but I think, as you get closer to your goal, another reason you need to know what your goal is, you should probably consider de-risking your portfolio. And I know you talk about this, Chad, with like reducing your debt load, for example. Like, these are things that I start to think about as I scale. Like, I'm fortunate to have a good portfolio and I'm getting, pretty close to my financial goals. So it's like, do I need to put 20% down, or should I put 40% down on a property, because that's going to increase my cash flow and it's going to reduce my risk very considerably? Or like, do I need to buy in a C-class neighborhood and get, a 9% cash on cash return? Or should I buy in a B plus neighborhood and get a 5% cash on cash return? And I think that kind of evaluation is super important, because again, another reason why you should need to know your goals is because if you're getting close to your goals, like, you might be taking more risk or spending more time than you actually need to be doing. And I think this sort of portfolio management process helps you sort of think through, just where you are, where you're trying to get to, and what the appropriate next steps are.
I wish I would have had this framework about 7-8 years ago when I was really digging it. I'm still digging into it, but I was really at the forefront of what you're talking about here. But one of the things I did that might be helpful to people is I just made a list of basically a spreadsheet of all my properties that I already had. And I had different columns of different rankings that were important to me, different priorities. And one of those was like what you mentioned, like, this one takes a ton of time and it's a hassle. It was like is this a hassle property or is this a low hassle property? And so that was one column. Another column was cash flow. Another column was, is this a really risky debt or not a really risky debt? And so, I had like 4 or 5 columns, and I basically ranked my properties qualitatively. Like, all right, this one has like 3 out of 4 negatives. Like, let's either refinance that property, let's sell it, let's just do something. And I call that pruning my portfolio. So you constantly prune it, almost like you have a fruit tree. The more you prune it, either selling, refinancing, reallocating your capital, at some point you end up with a fruit tree that you're like, yeah, there's few little things I could tweak, but like, I don't need to do that much with this portfolio, right? It takes some work. It takes some persistent work, but that's what the payoff has been really big. And that's where the 2-hour work weeks and the more peace of mind come in, is that, but you have to go through a process like this, like you give people, of assessing where you are, making a thesis, and updating it over time. Because if you don't, if you're just going to be willy-nilly and kind of fly by the seat of your pants, you're just going to be floating to the next thing, and you're not going to have your boat. It's like a boat that doesn't have it's not going in the right direction. It doesn't have a direction. It's just floating around wherever the wind takes it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really strongly resonate with that. And I like the analogy of pruning, because the little I know of botany is that, like, when you cut down some of the branches, the ones that remain are actually stronger, and right. I think that's really important. Is like, as you scale, as you grow, it's like, I try and do less. Like, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to scale, I'm going to try all these new strategies. I'm like, I'm going to scale by doing less. Like, I'm going to just do the 3 things I know how to do and that are going to work for me, but I'm going to do them extremely well in a low risk way, because I'm at the point in my career I don't need to take risk. And I think, you and I are talking a lot, we're sort of later in our investing career, about scaling down. But I think this process also works if you're scaling up. Like, I give an example in the book where it's like, if you did a BRRRR, you might evaluate your situation and see that you now have 15 hours a month or 15 hours a week that you just got back. And like, if you're trying to scale up rapidly, you need to redeploy those 15 hours into the highest and best use in your portfolio, which might be flipping a house or doing another BRRRR, self-managing something or something like that. So it's not just for like end stage portfolio planning. It's also like making the most of your growth years as well.
Dave, I'm really excited about this book. I'm excited most this framework. This is, as someone who's an educator and really cares a lot about the success of the people who are listening here. Like, I think this is just another really important tool in people's toolbox, and I'm really thank you for writing it. I know how hard writing a book is, and probably all the iterations you had to go through to put all this together. I want to give you a chance. Is there anything else you'd like to say to people who are considering their strategy and where they're going? Like, what final advice would you give them that would help them? We're early in 2024 still. There's a lot of room to still do some planning. What other advice would you give them as we close here?
The thing that I love so much about real estate is that there's a strategy for everyone. It is, if you, no matter what experience you come from, how much income you have, I genuinely believe that pretty much anyone can find a way to improve their financial situation through real estate. And I encourage you not to think about what is the perfect strategy. I get questions all the time. Is this one better than this one? Is this market better than this one? I don't personally like that way of thinking about it. I really think what you need to think about is what is the right strategy for you, and realize that this is a very personal thing. You are starting a business, and you should start a business that is, going to achieve the specific things that you want in life, and really not get too worried about what other people are doing, because there are many, many valid ways to succeed in real estate investing, and you should just focus on the ones that are right for you.
Well said. The book Start with Strategy is now available. It just came out this episode as this episode comes out. So go check it out. It's available on BiggerPockets, and follow Dave. Dave's, if you go to at the Data Deli on Instagram, I know he's there. He's on BiggerPockets. He has a great podcast on the market, which I listen to as well. I think it's one of the better podcasts out there. So thank you all for listening. Dave, thanks for being here, and I hope to connect with you again soon.
Thanks a lot, Chad. I appreciate it.
If you like this topic, I think you'll like my next video, How to Buy Your First Investment Property in 10 Steps. This is a how-to video by me made to guide beginners step-by-step to your first deal. There'll be a link below in the podcast description or the YouTube description. Thanks for watching. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson, and this is a channel to help you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.